Hello, I'm Marcus. In a quaint little town named Maplewood, nestled in the heart of Ohio, I reside. It's a setting where familiarity reigns, and the rhythm of life allows for moments of tranquility while still keeping excitement at bay. I have spent the majority of my life in this place. This is a favorable environment, a secure environment. There aren't many significant surprises or notable changes. I am currently employed as a project manager at a mid-sized marketing firm located in this town. It's a satisfactory position. It may not be glamorous, yet it covers my expenses and provides me with a daily sense of achievement. My supervisor is Mr. Hall. He's in his 50s, consistently dressed in a suit, exuding a serious yet just demeanor. We may not socialize after hours, but our rapport is quite good. I never truly envisioned myself in this line of work. To be honest, it was more of a happy accident for me. Having just graduated from college, I found myself uncertain about my next steps. I was in need of a paycheck, and this was the first opportunity that came my way, so I decided to see it through. With the passage of time, I received a promotion. It's a decent position, yet it doesn't really spark any enthusiasm in me. The most significant shift in my life, at least from what I can recall, took place roughly 6 months ago. It was at that moment that my wife, Erica, made the decision to seek a divorce. I was caught off guard by it at that moment. I understood that our relationship had its challenges, but I never anticipated it would conclude in such a manner. It appears that she had been involved with another person without my knowledge for almost a year. Somehow, I overlooked the clues, and I can't quite grasp how that happened. It seems that when you're in a marriage that's crumbling, you might choose to overlook the obvious truths right before you. It struck me deeply, more intensely than I had anticipated. For months, I felt as though I was submerged, struggling to find my way to the surface. With each day that went by, the house seemed to grow more desolate. I immersed myself in my tasks to escape reality. I had to find a way to engage my thoughts. I began going to the gym more frequently, aiming to regain my fitness and reconnect with my true self. I had no intention of seeking anything out. I found myself unprepared for whatever came my way. However, one can only contain emotions for a limited time before they inevitably overflow. One evening, shortly after the divorce was finalized, I found myself in the office well past closing time. The week had dragged on, and I found myself needing to wrap up a few project proposals. The office stood in silence, empty now that everyone had departed. The sole sound was the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights above. Suddenly, I became aware of footsteps approaching. It was Regina, the wife of Mr. Hall. Allow me to share some insights about Regina. Though she's in her mid-40s, she appears as if she's just turned 35. She consistently presents herself impeccably, exuding a refined elegance, and while I've crossed paths with her in the office on several occasions, our interactions have been rather limited. She has consistently remained an enigma in my eyes. Not due to any unfriendliness or aloofness, but rather because she feels like a fish out of water in a sea of formal attire and corporate chatter. There is an undeniable aura surrounding her. Have you ever encountered someone who enters a space and instantly breathes life into it? That is Regina. She entered with a radiant smile, inquired about my well-being, and I responded that I was merely wrapping up some tasks. We engaged in light conversation for a brief while. It wasn't anything extraordinary, yet there was an intriguing quality to her demeanor that compelled me to pay attention, to truly listen. It had a distinct quality compared to the typical discussions I engaged in with others. She appeared truly engaged in my words. At first, it seemed inconsequential, but as the days passed, she began to visit my desk with increasing frequency. Easy chats, everyday moments. How is your work progressing? So, how did your weekend go? Minor details, yet each instance revealed something additional. There was an elusive quality to her words that I couldn't fully grasp. It was understated, yet undeniably present. Initially, I was at a loss for how to interpret it. I found it unfamiliar. I had experienced quite a journey with the divorce, and I was keen to avoid any further complications. I maintained a professional demeanor. Yet, a change began to stir within me. Perhaps, beneath it all, I was simply seeking a bond. A companion for conversation. A person who remained unaffected by their own issues. A person who grasped the essence of being trapped in less than favorable circumstances. It appeared that Regina was indeed that person. In the weeks that followed, my discussions with Regina grew increasingly regular. Initially, they were merely brief interactions within the workplace. Casual conversation, courteous grins. Yet gradually, they began to extend further. She inquired about my life, my history, and even my opinions on various topics such as literature and films. At that moment, it didn't seem significant to me. She was merely being cordial, wasn't she? One evening, as I was collecting my belongings to head home, she came up to me. "Marcus, do you have a minute to chat?" She inquired, her tone fluid yet tinged with uncertainty. "Of course, what's on your mind?" I responded, tossing my bag over my shoulder. She cast a furtive look around, ensuring that no one else was within earshot, then let out a deep sigh. "I had plans to meet a friend for dinner, but unfortunately, my car has decided not to start. I attempted to reach my husband, but he's occupied with meetings. Could you please give me a quick lift home?" The request seemed harmless enough. I paused for a moment, not out of doubt about the idea itself, but rather from an awareness of how it might be perceived. Mr. Hall was not the kind of individual who preferred to blend his personal and professional spheres. Yet, I couldn't ignore the way Regina gazed at me. Anticipating, yet tinged with a hint of shame, as if she despised the need to inquire. "Absolutely," I replied. "It's all good." We strolled to the parking lot, and she settled into the passenger seat of my car. Having my boss's wife sitting there, so close, felt oddly uncomfortable. The scent of her perfume lingered in the air, delicate yet luxurious. As I withdrew, she chuckled softly. "I trust this won't be too much trouble," she remarked. "I assure you, it's not something I regularly do to request favors from my husband's staff." I reassured her that it wasn't a significant issue. "I'm on my way home after this, anyway." She beamed and gazed out the window while we cruised through the town. The quietude enveloping us was not uncomfortable, rather, it was electric, as if an unvoiced sentiment lingered in the atmosphere. "You know, I don't believe we've ever truly had a conversation," she remarked after a pause. "This isn't the way." "Indeed, I suppose that's true," I conceded. "I've noticed your presence in the office, but Mr. Hall tends to maintain a strictly professional atmosphere." She released a gentle sigh. "That certainly seems like something he would do." I caught a glimpse of her, observing a subtle nuance in her expression. Perhaps a sense of irritation, perhaps a feeling of weariness. It was difficult to discern. "Are you fond of your collaboration with him?" she inquired, redirecting her attention toward me. For a moment, I paused before responding. "He is just. Challenging, yet just." She wore a sly grin. "That's quite a tactful response." I let out a soft laugh. I've come to realize that being truthful can occasionally lead to complications. Regina regarded me for a moment, then shook her head with a gentle chuckle. "I have feelings for you, Marcus. You stand out from the rest in that office." That took me by surprise. "Could you clarify what you mean?" She gave a slight shrug. "Many of them seem to be either overly eager to win my husband's approval or simply hesitant to speak for fear of misstepping. You stand out." I was at a loss for words in that moment. I simply nodded, my gaze fixed on the road ahead. As we arrived at her residence, a stylish, contemporary dwelling nestled in a charming neighborhood, she glanced at me with a warm, appreciative smile. "Thank you," she expressed. "Your appreciation means a lot to me." "Anytime," I responded, though uncertainty lingered about when, or if, an occurrence like this would arise again. She paused briefly before releasing her seatbelt. "If you ever find yourself in need of a conversation, feel free to reach out anytime." The offer was straightforward, yet it carried a weight, imbued with an indefinable complexity. "Thank you, Regina," I replied, making an effort to maintain a steady tone. She paused for a fleeting moment, offering me a final smile before exiting the car and vanishing into the house. As I drove away, an unsettling sense lingered, suggesting that this wouldn't be the final time she'd seek my assistance. The evening following my drive with Regina lingered in my mind, her words echoing long after we parted ways. It wasn't merely her words, it was the manner in which they were delivered. Her voice carried a certain weight, and the intensity of her gaze suggested a depth that went beyond mere politeness, hinting at unspoken layers beneath the surface. Yet, I set the thought aside. She was the wife of my boss, and any intrigue I felt about her had to remain precisely that, intrigue. That's the narrative I crafted for myself. Several days later, as I was departing the office once more in the late hours, my phone vibrated with a call from an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I paused before responding. Greetings? Hey Marcus, it's Regina. I sat up, taken aback by the sound of her voice. Hello there, how's it going? She paused for a moment, then released a soft sigh. I realize this is a bit sudden, but would you be open to grabbing a drink with me? Care for a beverage? I surveyed the vacant office, then checked my watch. The clock had already struck 9. Is everything all right? I really need to have a conversation with someone. Being at home alone tonight just doesn't feel right. I realized I ought to have declined. I was certain that this encounter would lead to no positive outcome. Yet, before I could fully process my thoughts, I heard myself asking, where should I meet you? 20 minutes later, I stepped into a serene bar on the outskirts of town. The atmosphere was calm, with only a handful of patrons lingering at the bar, while gentle melodies floated through the air. Regina had arrived, settled into a cozy booth, tucked away in the corner. She appeared transformed this evening, exuding a sense of ease, yet there was an unmistakable air of detachment about her. You came, she said, a small smile gracing her lips as I settled into the seat opposite her. It seemed like you were in need of some company, I responded. With a soft sigh, she twirled her drink in the glass, lost in thought. I suppose I did. In that fleeting moment, silence enveloped us both. It was evident that she had thoughts swirling within her, thoughts she struggled to articulate. Thus, I lingered. At last, she raised her gaze to meet mine. Have you ever found yourself in a rut? I furrowed my brow. Could you clarify what you mean? Throughout your journey, your decisions matter. It's as if you're navigating through a life that doesn't truly resonate with you, yet the path to transformation remains unclear. I pondered that for a moment. If anyone could grasp that emotion, it was certainly me. Indeed, I acknowledged it. I experienced those feelings for quite a while, particularly prior to my divorce. Regina nodded slowly, as though she had anticipated that response. I love my husband, she said, her voice tinged with a hint of uncertainty, as if she were seeking reassurance in her own words. Or at least, that was the case for me in the past. That took me by surprise. She emitted a faint, mirthless chuckle. I find myself questioning the reason I'm sharing this with you. I hardly know you at all. At times, it feels simpler to confide in someone who isn't woven into the fabric of your daily existence, I remarked. A person who holds no expectations for you. She observed me intently for a prolonged moment, then slowly shook her head. You truly stand apart from the men I typically encounter. Uncertain of how to reply, I simply lifted my drink and took a sip. Our conversation stretched on for more than an hour. Reflecting on existence, the weight of regrets, and the choices we longed to alter. It was peculiar, the way it seemed so instinctive. It felt as though we were more than just two individuals exchanging pleasantries, we were two souls who genuinely grasped something deeper about one another. At one moment, Regina extended her hand across the table, her fingers lightly brushing against mine for the briefest instant. It was understated, almost imperceptible, yet it was sufficient to send my heart racing. I should go, she murmured gently. Indeed, I concurred, although a part of me wished for the evening to linger on. She rose to her feet, pausing for a brief instant. Thank you, Marcus, for your auditory experience. Whenever, I stated, feeling the weight of my sincerity more than I might have intended. As she stepped out of the bar, I sensed that whatever this was, it was far from finished. I convinced myself that evening at the bar was merely a fleeting encounter. Regina was in need of a confidant, and I happened to be the one she reached out to. Yet, beneath the surface, I understood that this was not the reality. When she reached out again a few nights later, suggesting we grab a coffee, I didn't think twice before agreeing. We gathered at a serene little cafe on the fringes of town, a place tucked away, far from the gaze of known faces. As I entered, she was already present, idly stirring her coffee with a distant look in her eyes. Her hair was gathered into a relaxed ponytail, and she appeared transformed, less refined than she typically did in the office or at corporate gatherings. Authentic. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything significant," she remarked as I took a seat opposite her. "Absolutely not," I responded. "To be frank, I could really benefit from some companionship." She smiled, yet there lingered an enigmatic quality, an inscrutable depth, beneath the surface. In the initial 30 minutes, our dialogue was quite casual. We exchanged thoughts on melodies, films, and various trivial matters that held little significance. I recounted a dreadful action film I had seen the previous night, and she chuckled, shaking her head at my absurd portrayal of the most cringe-worthy moments. For a time it seemed ordinary, as if we were merely two individuals relishing in one another's presence. Yet again, the dialogue began to take a different direction. "Marcus," she said, placing her cup on the table. "Have you ever sensed that you're merely putting on a facade of happiness?" I released my breath gently. Indeed, I acknowledged it. I experienced that feeling frequently during my marriage. She nodded, her gaze falling to her hands. "I once cherished my husband. I truly did. However, at this point, it seems as though I'm merely following a routine. It feels as though I'm merely acting as the ideal partner, yet the authenticity has faded away." I was at a loss for words in response to that. I wasn't the one who could mend her marriage, and I certainly wasn't the one who ought to be listening to this. She savored her coffee, taking her time, before meeting my gaze with a profound intensity. At times, I ponder how my existence might have unfolded had I opted for different paths. Had I chosen a different partner? If I had taken more time before committing to a settled life. I adjusted my position, absorbing the gravity of her statements. It seems we all ponder the possibilities of what could have been. Yet, at times, such thoughts can lead you to overlook the positive aspects of what you possess. She emitted a brief, mirthless chuckle. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it simply brings to light the fact that you've been deceiving yourself for quite some time." I was at a loss for words in that moment. A part of me yearned to urge her to halt, to refrain from venturing down this path. Yet, a different part of me yearned to continue listening, to remain the person she could confide in when it seemed no one else truly grasped her feelings. As she extended her hand across the table, her fingertips lightly grazed my own. It was understated, reminiscent of that initial encounter. Yet this time, she remained close. I gazed at her, and in that fleeting moment, I glimpsed something in her eyes that sent a surge through my heart. Something left unsaid. A challenge I felt uncertain about confronting. "We ought to leave," she declared abruptly, shattering the silence. I nodded, unable to find the words. As we stepped outside, the atmosphere felt denser, imbued with an unspoken tension that lingered around us. "Would you like a ride home?" I inquired, torn between a desire for her to decline and a wish for her to agree. She paused, pulling her coat more snugly around her. "I believe I'll take a stroll for a while. Empty my mind." "Regina." She glanced my way, and for an instant, I believed she might utter something deeper. Her lips parted just a fraction, as though words were on the brink of escaping, yet she lingered in uncertainty. Instead, she merely smiled, a wistful, understanding kind of smile. "Thank you very much. Marcus," she whispered gently. Before I could utter a word, she pivoted and strolled away, vanishing into the darkness. I lingered in that moment, observing her departure, fully aware that this was just the beginning of something much larger. I ought to have just let it be. That night at the cafe, I ought to have just walked away and allowed everything to calm down. However, I did not. 7 days went by in silence from Regina. No texts. No unexpected encounters at the workplace. Silence prevails. Still, she lingered in my thoughts, refusing to fade away. Each time I walked by Mr. Carter's office and caught a glimpse of her within, an inexplicable tug drew me in, as if I were anticipating an event to unfold. Nothing happened. As I was departing from work late one evening, my phone suddenly buzzed. "Regina, are you still working at the office?" I gazed at the message, my heart racing slightly. "I'm just heading out now." "What is the reason behind this?" She took her time to respond. I paused, weighing the decision of whether to simply return home. Yet again, my phone illuminated the room. "Regina, would you be able to meet with me?" Identical location as before. I acted without a second thought. I made a swift U-turn and headed directly to the cafe. Upon my arrival, she was already present, seated at the familiar corner table. Yet, on this occasion, she was fully present, not merely swirling her coffee in a daze or wandering through her thoughts. She appeared uneasy, as if she had been anticipating my arrival. Now that I found myself in this place, uncertainty clouded her mind about the next steps to take. "Is everything all right?" I inquired as I took my seat. She exhaled softly, her fingers gliding through her hair. "I'm not sure," she confessed. I had to reach out to someone." I nodded, biding my time. She surveyed the cafe, ensuring that no ears were prying, before leaning in a bit closer. "Marcus, I feel like I've reached my limit with this." My stomach nodded. "What should I do? This existence? Is this union? Is this an act?" Her voice was soft, barely above a whisper. "Each morning, I rise to a sense of overwhelming pressure. I return to a place that lacks the warmth of belonging. My conversations with my husband often feel rehearsed, as if we're merely exchanging the expected lines." I took a deep breath, selecting my words with precision. "Have you expressed your feelings to him?" She emitted a humorless chuckle. "Did you inform him?" "Marcus, Carter has stopped noticing me. He envisions a picture, a concept of what he believes his wife ought to embody. As long as I maintain my cheerful demeanor at corporate gatherings and fulfill my part, he remains silent." I found myself at a loss for words. A part of me felt compelled to suggest she should walk away from him if her unhappiness was so profound. Yet, I understood it was far more complex than that. She gently shook her head. "This is something I probably shouldn't share with you." "Feel free to share your thoughts with me, Regina," I said. "I'm not here to pass judgment on you." She let out a breath, her gaze falling to her hands. "That's the crux of the matter. You truly pay attention. You perceive my presence." The gravity of her words lingered in the space between us. Her message was unmistakably clear. Clear distinctions and straightforward interpretations are now the norm. In that instant, I realized that remaining would alter everything forever. "Regina." I began to speak, but just as I was about to complete my thought, she took hold of my hand. This moment held more than a fleeting connection. She clutched it, her fingers entwined with mine as if she feared the moment of release. "Please tell me this isn't right," she murmured. "Instruct me to return home, and I shall comply." I parted my lips, yet silence enveloped me. Due to my inability to do so. The reality was, I wished for her to stay. As she leaned in, her face mere inches from mine, it became clear that we had already crossed an unspoken boundary. I ought to have put an end to it that night. I ought to have suggested to Regina that she head home. To mend what has been fractured or to depart from it gracefully. However, I did not. That evening unfolded into yet another. And yet another. Our gatherings had evolved beyond the confines of cafes. We began crafting reasons to meet up. Late nights at the office, furtive glances in the corridors, fleeting moments when the world faded away. It transformed into something perilous, exhilarating, and irresistible. However, secrets have a way of coming to light. It unfolded more swiftly than I had anticipated. A couple of weeks following that evening at the cafe, I observed a change in Mr. Carter's behavior. He had lost the confident, untouchable demeanor that I had come to know during our years of collaboration. He was preoccupied, on edge. As I noticed him gazing at me from his office window one afternoon, an instinct deep within me whispered that he was aware. I attempted to maintain my composure, yet everything unraveled at an alarming pace. Regina grew increasingly anxious, glancing back over her shoulder each time we were in each other's company. It seems he might have an inkling of what she confided one evening while we were secluded in my car. He has been posing unusual inquiries to me. I expressed to her that we needed to put an end to this. That it simply wasn't worth the gamble. However, the moment had passed. The clash took place on a Friday night. The office was almost deserted when I received a message from Carter's assistant. He desired to meet with me. Isolated. I stepped into his office, my heart racing. He sat behind his desk, fingers intertwined, his face a mask of ambiguity. "Kindly shut the door, please." "Marcus," he stated. I certainly did. He gazed at me in silence for what felt like an eternity. He opened the drawer, retrieved his phone, and smoothly pushed it across the desk in my direction. Hit play. Though I wavered, deep down I understood that I had to proceed. I reached for the phone and pressed play. The video had a grainy quality, yet it remained sufficiently clear. Regina and I were in my car, engaging in conversation, chuckling. And then there was a kiss. My stomach plummeted. "You know," Carter said, his voice unsettlingly calm. "My faith in you, Marcus, has always been unwavering. I never imagined you would be the type to betray me like that." I gazed up at him, searching for the perfect words to express myself. However, there were none. She informed me that it had come to an end. He persisted, reclining in his chair. She expressed her desire to leave. "However, you were meant to be part of my team. My companion." I parted my lips to utter a word, yet he raised a hand to silence me. "There's no point in being dishonest. I have been aware for weeks." My hands tightened into fists. "So, why didn't you speak up?" He released a sardonic chuckle. "I was curious to discover the extent of your commitment. I was curious to know if you had the courage to acknowledge it." Quietude. He rose from his seat, made his way to the window, and gazed down at the bustling city beneath him. "Listen, Marcus, there are two paths we can take from here." I took a deep breath. "What might those be?" He glanced over his shoulder, his face devoid of warmth. "First, I turn your existence into a relentless struggle. I destroy your professional journey. I will ensure that no organization considers you for employment again. And I will ensure you deeply regret ever laying a hand on my wife." A shiver coursed through me. "And two." He offered a warm smile. "You turn and leave. This evening. No letter of resignation. No 2 weeks' notice. You vanish. Should our paths cross once more, I assure you, the atmosphere will be far from cordial." I realized at that moment that he was not merely putting my job at risk. He was making threats towards me. I rose to my feet, my legs trembling beneath me. "I will take my leave." Wise decision. I began to walk away, but just as I approached the door, he called out once more. "Ah, and Marcus." I came to a halt. She was always going to stay by my side. I tightened my jaw and exited without saying anything further. That marked the final moment I laid eyes on Regina. That night, I gathered my belongings and the following morning, I departed from the town. There are no farewells. No explanations needed. I vanished exactly as he instructed me to. As I drove away, an unsettling thought lingered in my mind. Perhaps she had orchestrated this from the very beginning.